Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We're always back. This is another glorious edition of Ask That. My name is Clark Zell, your hostess with the mostess. And today we're going to have a great conversation with a good buddy of mine. Keith Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I've been looking forward to this. This is certainly not our first time that we have forayed into a podcast experience.
I think this is the first time sober, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's no Mexican martinis this time.
Exactly.
The last conversation that we had over those martinis lasted for a few hours and was quite insightful, and I could probably find that somewhere. I think it's still living on the internets.
I thought it was under court order and we had to destroy it.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get the memo on that one, so.
Oh, okay.
Nor do I even probably know the login ID. I'm looking forward to this conversation because we connect, every few months and have some kind of insightful thing. And here we are again, and we're going to throw it down on the old record. But for everybody who's watching, who are you?
Oh, I'm Keith Casey. I work on APIs. I live and breathe APIs now for about 17 years, something like that. I don't know. I'm getting old. I currently work for Okta. I work on the API programs and API access management, which is OAuth as a service. Prior to that, I did API startup making audio and video searchable. I worked at Twilio. I was one of the early evangelists there, employee number 25 or so. I've lived and breathed APIs, and kind of on a more fun angle, I live and breathe how to abuse and misuse data just to see what shenanigans I can create.
And there are a number of shenanigans that you do, in fact, create. Tech or not related to tech.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about APIs today, and I thought we would take the approach of, a mentor style of thing. I've got some new stuff coming that we'll talk about here soon. There's a stack of APIs that will need to be there to facilitate it. It's all greenfield. Let's talk about kind of the legitimate pros and cons to everything that's there, how to kind of get set up right. Like what does this world really look like today, given, doing it right and maybe for me on a shoestring budget. And then, what kind of stuff is there where we need to be concerned about it? Like we were riffing earlier, you were talking about the Panera breach, and we've seen, everything out there seems to be glued together by some API. So,
absolutely.
So where do we start? If I'm to take, we should come up with we'll just call it that. If I'm to take that and, make an API, where's the best place to really start with that?
So let me actually flip that around a little bit. I'll tell you the worst place to start.
Oh, even better.
There are more and more frameworks that say, I will take your data model or your data access classes, your database or whatever, and turn around and make an API on top of that. So they kind of take the nouns that are in your database, wrap the HTTP verbs around it, and say, there, you have a database. Yeah. That's bad. That's
direct
awful.
Access.
It's not only direct access, but your data model, like the way you store data in your database, doesn't tell anything about how people actually use it.
Yeah.
It doesn't speak anything to the goals of the user. It doesn't speak anything to the UI of your website. It doesn't speak to any of those things. You've got a total disconnect happening there. And so my sort of philosophy is that an API, the I in API stands for interface. Remember?
Yep.
So we need to treat an API with the care and the understanding and the thought that we treat all of our other user interfaces, because it is one. Now, unlike our web user interfaces, like if you want to redesign your website, we could do that pretty easily. You could do that and the consequences aren't a big deal because there's a human sitting on the other side that can look at it and go, oh, here's how things changed, and they adapt. APIs have all the complexity of a user interface, but have to be much more stable and can't change nearly as quickly. I mean, the Twilio, the 2008 version of their API is still online because people still use it. It's 10 years old and they can't change it much.
Yeah. I've recently gotten into I mean, I guess it's been about, seems like about a year now, into GraphQL. And the thing that I've really appreciated about that is it's made the I the big I, because you really are forced to think about how you would expose this rather than just giving somebody a dumpster fire. And then you also are there's pressure on you to make sure that you deal with your database well as well, right? Mm-hmm. You're not, if you're going to expose something in such a way and you're going to let somebody, query over it, people can make bad queries really easily, and thus you need to learn how to protect yourself, and that gets surfaces really high in that design context of things.
Well, and I like GraphQL. I both love it and hate it at the same time. I love it because the flexibility to be able to define and get flexible around payloads is great. Yeah. You can say, here's what I need for this particular use case. Yep. At the same time, it feels like from a design perspective, a lot of times we're throwing our hands in the air and saying, you figure it out.
Yeah.
It's like when somebody comes to us and says, I need reporting for my system. And we say, oh, I can let you download a CSV here. It's a total abdication of responsibility. And It just drives me up the freaking wall. Sure. Used well, it's great. Used poorly, it's a dumpster fire crap show.
Yeah. I like the dumpster fire is like my new thing recently. I like to describe things as dumpster fires.
Well, I say a variation of crap show that probably shouldn't be said on this airing.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly an adult show, or not.
Whoa, wait a minute.
I haven't started drinking on this show yet, so.
Okay.
All right, so we need to care about the API from a usability perspective or our client's perspective, but I mean, there's a lot more that goes into just creating an API.
Oh, absolutely.
So where do we really start?
So I tried to go for that long, awkward pause just to throw you off a little bit. Yeah. So we need to stop and think about what our user actually wants to do. Like, what do our clients want to do? We need to make sure that we're solving their problems first. It goes back to just exposing a table probably doesn't actually solve their use case. So I go through user flows, just like you would on a website, saying the user authenticates, they do this, they do this, they do this. Here's the end result, or here's the intermittent state from each of those. Because one of the things I found really early, 10 years ago at this point, is that when you're designing an API and you're very deliberate about the problems you're solving, you'll find there's a lot of problems you don't have to solve. And if you don't have to solve those problems right now, things like like for that conference, the ability to do a bulk delete of the entire session table. And there are very few scenarios where via API you want to destroy every talk there is.
Right.
And so therefore, don't build it.
Yeah.
Like if that's a use case that there's really legitimately only one, maybe two people that should ever do that and should ever only happen once, don't have an API call for it. There's no need for it.
I was going to say, what about if there is a need for an API call, there's no need that it needs to be together with the other ones. You could create another stack that is hidden behind something and only used by CLIs at people at Amazon to accidentally go and delete all of EC2 or whatever it was, S3 that one day.
Yeah. But that comes down to understanding the use case. If you're building this for external users, partners, customers, whatever the case may be, they probably need to do certain things. Your system admins, your back-end services, whatever, they don't have to do the same things.
Sure.
Like when the Best Buy has a pretty good API. From the consumer standpoint, you can look up products, you can look up stores and hours and I think coupons or something like that.
Sure.
There is not a need for any customer to ever edit an item.
Right.
So they don't expose that.
Yeah.
Like that's one of those places where understanding the use case of what problems you're solving simplifies things quite a bit.
So then let's talk about the security side, because I know that this is near and dear to you, and probably the hardest thing to deal with versus just kind of getting and exposing data. I mean, where do we stand in 2018 on security land of an API?
Well, first of all, getting and exposing data is really easy. It's trivially easy. Doing it in
Yeah.
a secure way, that's a little more challenging.
Yeah.
So my whole mindset is, and this is actually my employer, Okta. Our entire mindset is give the right access to the right person for the right thing for the shortest amount of time possible. And then coupling that with APIs, part of like for every social platform, if you don't have to collect that information, don't. If you don't have it, it can't be leaked.
Sure. Yeah.
Simple as that. But when we get into the authentication layer, I really believe in very fine-grained controls. So if you've got a mobile app for that conference, and you say, hey, I want to be able to show the talks that you're signed up for, that you favorited, be able to show a map or whatever. Realistically, the information that the permissions that you give to that mobile app should be very small.
Yeah.
It should be authenticate, probably with OpenID Connect or something, maybe just a general web form. It should be give me my list of talks, and I already know the context of who you are because you logged in.
Sure.
And favorite and unfavorite.
Yep.
And that's it. And that's all that authenticated session needs to be able to do.
Yeah.
So really fine-grained permissions are key.
What does the authentication stack look like?
Kind of a couple different approaches. One of them is like an API key, like a Twilio API key, where when you create an account, you've got an API key that then you embed in your applications. While that works, it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Because whether you're talking about Twilio or whatever, generally like you get one API key for an account. So if you have 12 applications, you've put that API key in 12 different places.
Right.
And now if that key is compromised because that one application is running on a bad server and someone downloaded and misused it,
Yep.
now you need to reset all 12 applications at the same time to try and minimize downtime. That's not a fan of that approach, but it works. It's relatively reliable and it's widespread. I'm horribly biased towards OAuth, OAuth 2.0 specifically, because that's my product in my day job.
Sure.
Because it gives us the fine-grained control. It gives us the ability to rotate keys pretty easily. It gives us the ability to revoke tokens, things along those lines. So it just ends up being a better, more secure approach overall.
So what does an OAuth infrastructure setup look like? I mean, if this is the better approach and I'm a little guy who wants to get landed and use that, how do I even start? Where's my journey take me on that?
So one of the first things that you learn is that your authentication and the authorization that goes along with it of who you are and what can you do doesn't have to be a core part of your API. So breaking that out, even using like single sign-on through Twitter or Facebook or Google or your own server works. So what you do is you come and you make a request and you say, hey, I need to authenticate. The API itself usually says, hey, you need to authenticate with this system over here. You go over to that system. So the cool thing is that the API never actually gets your credentials because I'm sent over to that system, whether it's Okta or Google or whatever, authenticate over there, and then they create a token with the right permissions. So the API never sees your credentials. What's called the IDP or the identity provider never sees what you're doing with the API, and now everything's more secure by default.
Sure. And so then where do we start to get in trouble? I mean, like you make it sound easy, but we know that the reality is that it's really not.
Yeah, we get into trouble because people say, I can do this better. So they roll their own encryption scheme. They come up with their own like handshake mechanism for passing data back and forth. And don't roll your own encryption. Like that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Quite often they use like a username and password. Like early days of Facebook, the way they'd import your contact list from like Gmail or whatever, they'd say, hey, give us your Gmail username and password and suck in all that data because no one's going to abuse your Gmail credentials.
Yeah, right, totally.
Yeah, because we could totally trust Facebook. And then people forget that there are bad actors out there. I mean, some of them are named Keith, but there are other bad actors that try and misuse data. So like Panera, for example. Panera is like the one that's kind of frustrating the hell out of me because I found out about the Panera breach while I was sitting at a Panera. So it felt very
So why don't you for people who don't know what's the Panera breach
So
or
Panera
what's
Breach
happening?
is, yeah, so August 2017, somebody was playing with the Panera app, sitting in a Panera, and they said, oh, hey, look, the application behind the scenes is making a request to get my user information. So things like my name, my phone number, address, email, my food preferences, the last four digits of my credit card. And so there's a URL sitting there that they were able to pull all their information. And there was an ID on that URL. And being the elite hacker that he was, said, hey, what if I add one to that ID? So he added one to the ID and saw the next customer's information. He said, what if I subtract one? So he subtracted one and looked at the previous customer's information. So he did this elite hacking method of iterating between 1 and 47 million.
Yeah, that's a super serious loop. I mean,
I know, like computers are really bad at counting,
that's right.
especially big numbers like 47 million.
Yeah, let's not use curl.
Yeah, exactly. So he is able to show that basically their entire database was available via APIs. So he reported in, I think it was August or so last year. They said, "Hey, are you an evil hacker? Why are you doing this stuff? This is wrong. We're going to report you to the FBI." So a couple months later, he checked; it was still open. A couple months later, he checked. In April, he finally lost it and contacted Krebs on Security, which is a great security blog, talks about all this stuff. Krebs validated, yeah, it's still open, and then started talking about it and wrote an article and tweeted it and everything. Panera said, oh, don't worry, it's secure now. So then he hit the website again and it was still open. And it was a mess because they were leaking all this customer information. And the best part was the director of information security from Panera, his previous job, have you heard this one?
I have not. I'm scared
Guess
to
what?
though.
Guess what his previous job was?
I'm the head of security.
Head of security at Equifax.
Holy Lord.
Yeah. So for people just
Yeah.
tuning in, Equifax was the big breach last year, where people got access to your credit reports.
And it
So
really
this is an
seems like,
ongoing pattern.
yeah, it really seems like Equifax got away with murder too. I mean, I I know like my in-laws and others who, aren't necessarily are not in the tech scene, right? Everybody got super worried about it. And it's, I don't know. I try to be a bit pragmatic about it and go, well, chances are somebody's already got your stuff anyways. Like, I don't know that this was any new gasoline on the fire. So we wouldn't get too worried about it and, go overreacting. But, still wrong by every stretch imaginable. But it seems like this organization got away scot-free.
Yeah, they took a 30% hit on their stock price for about 30 days, but don't worry, their CEO and the security officers and everything sold before the news came out. So don't worry,
Right.
they're safe.
Yeah.
So they took like a 30% hit, but then they sell a product to secure your identity and like lock down your account. So then revenue went up the following quarter after they announced it.
I mean,
So they got back like 2/3 of what they lost. I'm like, you guys are assholes, and you're
yeah.
making money off of doing this.
Yeah, it's hard to not feel helpless in that scenario. I mean,
Yeah.
I get we essentially are. I mean, if we look back across all the years, Target, Home Depot, Equifax, Panera, what other big ones have happened?
TJ Maxx, Office of Personnel Management. That's one of them that scares me. Um, geez, Facebook,
Yeah.
Yahoo.
Yeah,
Uh,
Yahoo. Yeah, I forgot about the Yahoo one.
yeah, I mean, they all look the same. Now, the difference is whether it's Home Depot, Target, TJ Maxx, or whatever, and they leak credit card information. You can go and cancel your credit card and get issued a new one.
Yeah.
The Equifax one is scary because that's your personal information
Yep.
and it doesn't change.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yep.
when you
There
sign
is
up for
no
that new
token.
credit card, well, yeah, when you sign up for that new credit card and it says, which street did you live on? Well, anyone who has Equifax data has that,
Yeah.
and that doesn't change. So we're screwed.
Yeah, yeah.
Other than that,
And
I'm optimistic about it.
well, and it's funny because I think that we should recognize the fact that even though it was breached last year or whenever, I think it was last year. Um, there is nothing to say that that's not being held onto for 5 years before that gets instituted as something to be used.
Oh,
Just
absolutely.
just, I think all too often people think, oh, it's breached in, the next 6 months. I'll see things, when I think it'll be the next 6 years.
Oh, at least. I mean, when you go and you get a car loan, they validate things going back all the way to like your first job and stuff.
Yeah.
And now everything up until that date is compromised.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that concerns me is, to the best of our knowledge, that was read-only access to be able to download stuff. What if it was write access?
Yeah.
What if an
totally.
attacker had access to edit your credit history?
Yeah.
That's messed up.
Well, yeah.
Sorry.
No, so I did never thought about that. In the
This is what I do.
Shit.
This is what yeah, sorry, man.
I have the slight panic attack because when I was 20, let's see, I bought my first house when I was 22, I think, 23. And when I went to go buy my first house, my credit report was littered with 2 other Social Security numbers. I, on my credit report, had already owned a house. I had, 15, 20 credit cards. I had, like, the amount of debt that I was quote unquote in and whatever was staggering. So as you can imagine, the broker that I was working with to be lended money, he was like, we need to have a conversation. And, throws down the credit report. Now, of course, I had never looked. We're talking about 1998, and I had never looked at any of that kind of stuff. And it, thankfully, because of my age at the time, it was obvious that I had not had a 30-year note on a house when I was only 22, and thus couldn't be paying for it for 15 years because if that was the case, I would have no reason to be there lending, getting a loan at that point.
So what's it like getting a loan as a 7-year-old?
Yeah,
that seems challenging.
You just have to be able to print nicely. But it took a year of the lender and us and all of those TransUnion, Equifax, all those credit bureaus to get that straightened out in what is at that time was a very obvious situation of, like, 1, I don't have 3 Social Security numbers. 2, I'm 22. And it's better now, but then you say, well, what if they had write access? That would be a disaster.
Oh, absolutely.
Of epic proportions, because nobody would believe you anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in those cases that you just listed there, it was very clear that stuff was wrong. Like, there was no question about it.
Right.
And it still took a year. It was still an opaque process.
Right.
You probably still had to provide all kinds of documentation to prove you were you.
Right.
Now imagine things that are kind of borderline that are believable, but maybe not.
Right.
And some things that are like, oh, the odds are this is true. Even if it's false, odds are this is true.
Right.
Like, oh, it's awful.
Yeah,
it's horrifying.
That is, I didn't think about that. Damn it.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
This is why we don't talk very often.
In not feeling helpless, I mean, are we as a tech industry, are we doing anything to right this wrong? Not the righting of the wrong of the Equifax, but like the bigger picture of the world. Are we actually trying to fix this problem, or are we just saying, well, American Express is really good at figuring out fraud. I'll get a phone call and literally, I mean, our card's been compromised. I can't tell you how many times, and it's like, I have to imagine the poor suckers at the register, because I get the phone call and they're like, are you buying a pair of shoes? I'm like, nope. Drinking beer on my patio. We'll get you a new card.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally instantaneous.
So let me say that as an industry, no, we're not doing much. We're doing a few things. We're not doing a ton. We need to do more. And the reason is, not only is this a pain for us, this is a pain for the people, like our family and friends, who have no clue about any of this. We're compromising their data. And I actually presented on this. I gave a presentation this past weekend called Misusing and Abusing APIs for Fun and Profit. And it all culminated to this point of the Volkswagen case just recently, where there was a software developer that was told, hey, look, fudge the tests. So when the car is running in test mode for EPA validation, make it so it puts out less pollution.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not an API case, totally. But it's a software developer being told, do
Yeah.
something wrong and don't worry about it. So
Yeah.
the lead software developer on that team is now serving in prison for 3 years. And the judge actually said, look, this person was not the mastermind in the case, but he didn't push back because he didn't want to lose his job. So we as developers, we need to get our act together and realize there's more than just losing our job on the line. If we're doing these things, if we're asked to do something illegal or unethical, we need to push back. And you know what? It's entirely possible to lose our jobs. But you know what? This guy lost his job and is in
And went to
prison.
jail. Yeah. Do you think that he knew that he was being told to do that for the other stuff, or that that was the card he just got dealt the card on the sprint board and said it needs to run like this in test mode?
I don't know. And I
Like
don't know.
that bit of
So
manipulation there, right? That context. I always talk about the context is so key, but often that context can be easily left off, which makes the ethical thing harder to understand whether or not it's completely reasonable to think, okay, hey, we're in test mode and we're trying to figure this out. Like, I don't know. I mean, seems odd in the diesel case, but anyways,
yeah.
like that context gets let off and the feature gets put in, and then you take two or three other people and somebody can manipulate these things and put them together such that it is the evil genius plan.
So what that points at is that we need to be more than just heads down building code. We need
Yeah.
to understand what our code is being used for and how it's being used, how it fits with the larger part of the system. And one, from a career technical progression standpoint, that's fantastic. That'll help us have a bigger and better career. At the flip side is we need to understand how these things fit together, because if we're being asked to do something illegal, we need to stop. Because we have a choice here. It's
Yeah.
up to us as professionals to stop this, or some idiot congressman or congresswoman will
Okay. Yeah.
it
Oh,
could be
there's a
either.
lot of dudes though, but yeah.
Yeah, it could be either. One of them will step forward and say, I know how to regulate software development.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the last thing we want. We have this great ecosystem of self-taught developers who come up from a variety of backgrounds and
Yep.
perspectives and all these
Yep.
things. If we go into a professional licensing model, that's gone.
Yeah.
You're going to need a 4-year degree. You're going to need licensing. You're going to need accreditation, and that will be awful.
All right.
So we need to clean house, or they'll
Yeah.
do it for us.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And so let's take this further because I enjoy where this conversation's going, and I knew once we got started, like it's going to get deep. Let's
Yeah.
talk about the Facebook stuff. So
It's
they
not a data breach. It's not a
right.
data breach.
So so it's hard for me. So the Facebook stuff being, just to put some context around it, that people were able to understand more about the user, the Analytica or whatever the name of that place was, right? And get all this information about their users. I, not sticking up for Facebook or not, they have a piece of responsibility in this. I think it's interesting that we're in times where I don't know that they necessarily could have, if you go back 10 years, and you think about where we were in producing APIs and doing all of this stuff. I think it would have been impossible back then to like think of the evil genius side of like, oh, if I do this, well, I shouldn't say impossible, but you have to be super forward thinking that in 10 years or in some amount of time that like this ecosystem of other would be built and used in such a way to do evil harm or whatever.
Clark, I'm sorry. I'm going to call you on that though. That's bullshit.
No, but so hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm not sticking up for him. What I'm trying to draw the core. So we build a thing, and we don't necessarily always think about the bad that's going to happen, right? And so when a thing gets put out, an API, for example, how much work do we need to be doing on the evil genius side to say, I need to make sure that I'm not being misused?
Okay, so one, we should assume that our tools are going to be misused. Right off the bat, we need to assume. I've been writing since 2007 about this particular issue. So the fact that me as an outsider without access to the detailed data
Sure.
and all that sort of stuff, like this is not new. Two, their entire business model is advertising.
Yep.
Their entire business model is figuring out, how can I reach people who are like this, who like these things, who believe this, who
Sure.
do that. All
Sure.
that stuff. That's their entire freaking business model since 2006, 2007.
Yep. As is
So,
Google's.
Yeah,
As
absolutely.
is anybody who advertises. I mean, TV included, right?
Right.
Yep.
And this has happened before. As the Obama administration, not the administration, the campaign
Yep.
said in 2012, hey, look, we downloaded the entire social network of the U.S. for better advertising and targeting. In fact, 2012 and 2013, we saw dozens and dozens of articles about how their get out to vote efforts were so super targeted and everything.
Sure.
All of this is known, and it has been known for 10 plus years.
Sure.
So a good friend of mine in Austin said that calling Cambridge Analytica a data breach is like calling Halloween a candy breach.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Right.
This is what it's built for.
Right. Right.
So to throw your arms up in the air and say, "Oh my God, people are misusing this," yes, they always have been. That's their entire business model.
Right. So where's that? And where I was going is like, so we build an API, we put it out there, we secure it. Even if it is secured, which doesn't matter if you've given somebody access to it, then where do we stand on knowing, like, the understanding the patterns that somebody is using us? Because that in itself is almost a whole new product on it, right? Mm-hmm. Because as you know, we used to run a company that was doing hosting for, PaaS hosting, and the thing that we learned over time was we were being scripted against for people to do Bitcoin mining, but they got so damn creative of creating trial accounts and bouncing themselves around the world that we were bleeding money for people to just run their Bitcoin crap on our rigs. We would have never known that in the beginning. Like, who would have ever? We just would have never thought that we would become that. Nor was it a thing when it started.
This goes back to what I said earlier of, if there's not a need for that data, don't collect it, because then it can't be compromised. So in these scenarios of when you're collecting this information, collect as little and as specific information as you can. Don't collect everything. Second, understand the use cases that you're building for. In Facebook's case, their API was returning everything. I mean, the guy who had the Cow Clicker app talked about this.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I had your entire social network circa 2014, 2015. If there's not a use case specifically for that data, don't give it back.
Absolutely. But there's also the bigger picture of, like, you have a thing that's out there. Somebody can go get a piece from you, and somebody can get a piece from you, and somebody can go get a piece from you. And now that context that we were talking about is now gone, right? Mm-hmm. But understanding how you're being mistreated, that's a hard ass.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a hard thing to understand.
And frankly, it's challenging, if not impossible. You need people like myself who just come up with bad ideas to play with them and see what they come up with. The problem is that in Facebook's case, people have been talking about these bad ideas now for 15 years. Yeah. And the flip side, though, is if you're very fine grained about what you do and how you do it, that limits your attack surface.
Sure.
It limits the number of things they can do.
Yeah.
So my mindset is always start as small and specific as possible. And then if additional use cases come up, if additional needs come up, then expand. And frankly, Facebook returning all the data for years, it's not acceptable. That's just dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in interesting times, right? I think as computers and servers and clouds and machine learning and AI and all this stuff comes together, right? There isn't a storybook for the future, right? We would have never predicted 10, 15 years ago that a Facebook would have been anywhere near as big as it is, or Instagram or Snapchat or any of this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And God knows what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, when you can take Raspberry Pis and run machine learning and AI, right? Like, we're in a crazy, I mean, there's an Alexa sitting right next to me right now, right? I mean, just this crazy, my father-in-law, we got super, super concerned about his Alexa because it's sitting there listening. And I
Right.
pointed over at the machine, his computer, and I said, what's any different than that thing with the webcam and the mic, and it's sitting there running? Like, that's got the same attack surface as the other thing. And it was kind of like, boom, holy. I didn't really think about that. And it's like, you've been fine with that for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the stuff, so my mindset in that regard is that connectivity is getting faster and cheaper every day. Power is getting faster and easier to store every day. The processing power is getting bigger and easier, and at the same, processing time is getting better and cheaper at the same time. Like, the idea of an Alexa 10 years ago would have been absurd. It would have been as big as a brick.
Right.
And the next version is going to be smaller, and the next version is going to be smaller than that. And that opens up some cool and scary possibilities.
It does. And even more so with 5G coming around, and this has been something that's been rolling around in my head for quite a while, with 5G kind of on its, cusp of being mainstream, how much does the speed start to influence all the other things? Like, how much more is it able to enable when you're talking about ridiculously fast speeds from anywhere?
Oh, yeah. Well, think about Google Docs has been, online for 10, 12 years at this point.
Yep.
Rewind to 1998 when you were buying your house. Google Docs would not have worked then.
Right.
Not enough people were on the internet. The speeds were too slow. The connectivity was flaky. So we've already seen this and the adoption of this where, when I travel, I'm in San Francisco this week. This phone is my lifeblood. It's how I get a car. It's how I check into my flight. It's how I check into my hotel. Like 10 years ago, that would have been crazy. 20 years ago, it would have been impossible. So I think as connectivity improves, storage space on this is becoming less and less important.
Yeah, but I mean, so then what crazy stuff like, where does Crazy Keith go in Crazy Land? Because once that network's there, like, all you need is an instant. Like, there's no more like it's just there. Like, it's there, it's gone. You could have driven past a house, collected the SID, and it's gone. Well, granted, you could be collecting them in your car, driving, and everything's cool, but you could do more with it when you can send it somewhere.
Well, so I've been thinking about that in a lot of different ways, and we have a model for that already. Think of Star Trek. They had the little communicator on their chest. They'd tap it or they'd say, "Computer, do this." And this little device was really kind of dumb. It was basically an RFID with a voice channel attached to it. And all the central processing was in the ship's computer, or the cloud, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, it was the cloud.
It was the cloud. Yeah. And so what that means is that by making this device on the endpoint as dumb as possible, which we have familiarity with that,
and centralizing all our lives doing that, trying to make them as dumb as possible.
Exactly, and centralizing everything in the ship's computer or the cloud. Now we can put security in place. We can put multi-factor security, like authentication in place. We can do all that sort of stuff, but we need to understand what security models are we protecting against. That's a conversation we have here at Okta all the time of just because somebody's on your network doesn't mean anything. Because you know what? I can get on your network too. Yeah.
Well, in the getting on your network piece, and this is something
I'm already on yours, don't worry.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. It's fine because I'll let you in all the time. That actually, in this world of like IoT stuff, and you start to look around, I mean, I know for us, it's like, holy shit, there's another MAC address that joined, and it's, it's the VCR, it's the TV. We saw the TV, the whatever chipset that was in all of those TVs that got, what was that, worm, virus, Trojan, whatever that was floating around for that it was last year. There was
I don't
some.
remember. There's so many at this point. I don't.
Yeah, but so the scary thing was it was whatever chipset that was used for said devices being TVs and VCR, DVD players, whatever, that did network connectivity, had a hole, and that they were not patching it, and thus they were able to just run that thing through all the houses. And so you think about all the stuff that comes in and the responsibility of somebody to turn around as like these devices, we hear about them all the time. Like, what's the maintenance plan on them? Well, if you keep your device for 5 years, you may be 4 years past when you really should have kept it, even though it works just fine.
Well, and that you may outlive, like the device may outlive the company.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yep.
I mean, that's entirely
Chances
possible.
are
But
super high on that one.
you just said something really profound. Your VCRs on the internet?
Totally. Isn't yours?
I'm not sure. I don't think I have one anymore, but that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
I'm impressed.
It's awesome. We just run those tapes, baby. Just roll them around.
Be kind, rewind.
Yeah. Shoot. I mean, in the terms of I think about all this stuff together, right? We've got IoT, we've got APIs, we've got security. Our VCR is not doing OAuth back. There's, I mean, OAuth wasn't a thing; it was just O. But
It's just open. Yeah, I get it.
Just open.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, it's not unreal. I mean, I got a light here for the camera. Like these lights now have remote controls and all this stuff in there. Like it's not a stretch to think that these things, 5G gets cheap enough and broadband and all this, and now your silly light has network access with a shitty API that's on your network that talk to your machine that used to be in a safe spot. Take it back to the developer and the API and the thing that's being done. Like it's all coming together.
So I guess one big thing here, and I have this conversation here at Okta and with customers all the time. When we're building APIs for teams down the hall, we have one security posture. Because it's a team, it's down the hall, it's people we know, they have the very same security profile as us, whatever. Too many companies then decide we need to open this up to customers, to partners, to that team across the country, and they never reevaluate their security decisions that they made. And it's not even necessarily they're wrong. It's fundamentally the requirements have changed. Have we reevaluated our assumptions? Yeah. And too many people aren't doing that. So if you look at most of the breaches that have happened, it's because they took an internal API, said, wow, this is so great, we want to share this.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be
great? And that's
great?
when the problems happen. Yes.
Yeah.
And they need to stop and think. And this goes back to it's our responsibility to clean house here. When the requirements of a situation change, we need to reevaluate what we've done and said, does this still make sense? Is this still safe?
All right, so I'm going to take it one more place before we end up wrapping up this conversation. But
yeah,
there was a Medium article going around about I'm going to say how, in air quotes for people listening, how this guy could easily hack your site and your systems. And the introduction of the said hack was to drop an NPM module that added some value.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And it wasn't something that he did. He just said, look at how easy this would be to go do. And I immediately shit my pants. Like, no kidding. Like, you could totally slip that in the back door. And so to paint a little context for people, it essentially was, here's a very small NPM module that I've gone out and I've started giving PR requests to all of the big ones to fix a quote unquote problem or to add some value. And that NPM module then basically propagates itself through anything that it's used. And since you were the one who let it in the house, it's in the house. Yes. And once it's in the house, it can do whatever it wants. And it didn't even have to walk through the doors. And damn, that's scary because that's super easy.
Well, so at Okta, I end up working with a lot of banks, insurance companies, governments, that sort of thing. And one of the things we run into quite a bit is they want to roll their own libraries for credit card processing and for encryption and everything like that. And I constantly pound on them and I say, no, don't do that. Use a publicly available open source one, but audit it. Spend your time auditing these things because one, you can make sure that you don't have to support it. You can make sure it's secure. And at the same time, the internet as a whole gets a little bit better.
Yeah.
So that's one of those places where a bad actor can cause a lot of problems. Audit everything that's like core and strip away the stuff you don't need.
Yeah, but are we really, I mean, is that really feasible? I mean, unless you have a ton of like resources to do this, these code bases, the ones that add value, there's little ones that add value too, but if I'm going to go take that on, we're not talking about little code bases. We're talking about a big effort to do an audit. And ironically, it's 2018, and you would feel like there would be some tools out there that could do this, and there are some.
Yes.
But they are niche and expensive and not freely available, and that seems odd as well.
When we use any open source libraries of any sort, whoever the publisher is, we're outsourcing a piece of our infrastructure. Yeah. That's effectively what we're doing. So, Clark, you and I both have kids. Would you let a babysitter babysit them if you didn't know who they were, if you didn't know anything about them other than you saw a sign on a coffee shop?
Nope.
Audit them. Figure out, I'm putting a lot of trust in this person, in this group, in this code. Make sure it makes sense.
Yeah, but what percentage of people do you think do that?
About 0.1.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
So, like I said, we need to clean house before somebody else forces us.
Yeah, I agree. That scares the shit out of me.
You're welcome.
No, it's something that I've thought about for a while. I mean, we all do it. Like I'm not sitting here on my pedestal saying like, oh, I've audited every NPM module out there. Hell no, that hasn't happened. Like I've taken them just like anybody else, and it wasn't until that Medium article that whoever wrote, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Because it's not even that you audited your thing. It's did that other person audit their thing that they were doing?
Yes.
Or three down the road, and that other person that could be Facebook's React. Did React take something in and include it in their framework, and they didn't do their due diligence, but you trusted them because they were Facebook?
Yeah.
That line of trust is not there. Like, well, or shouldn't be there in its.
Well, no, it has to be there to some degree. It absolutely has to be there because whether we host on Azure or AWS or whatever, there needs to be some trust in there. But we need to understand where the trust is coming from, and the level of trust that this system provides, is that good enough for us? Yeah. It might be good enough to host that conference website. It's probably not good enough for Bank of America.
Hey.
So this goes back to the use cases.
We write good stuff.
Hey, I'm saying you have different use cases.
That bank.
That bank?
That bank.
Oh, is that for 2019? That bank?
Well, I don't know. If you want to give me your money, it could be for 2018, April 25.
Okay. So just
now open that bank.
All right. Accepting deposits. Not returning them, but accepting them.
Yeah. We only accept them. Well, look, let's be honest, Keith. We're not going to expose things that you don't need, and we feel like you don't need it back. So,
it's a long-term investment.
That's right. You can write your deposit, but you cannot read it.
Just come back in 20 years. Don't worry. We'll have the money.
That's right. Yeah, it's safe. We've got it in a vault. All right. So at the end of all of these, I like to acknowledge the other person. And with that being said, I want to acknowledge you, not for being here today, not even remotely close for that, although I do appreciate the conversation. I want to acknowledge you for the past, I don't know, I think we've known each other for 10 years probably at this point. I want to acknowledge you for the work that you've done in the community. I want to acknowledge you for helping me all the times where I've called you and said, I'm going crazy with the things that I'm doing, and how will I ever get to the next year or the next month? I want to acknowledge you for spending the time in the community and talking about some of the hard things while being as unbiased and realistic on both sides. I think you do a pretty good job of not only scaring somebody, but being true to oneself. And so with that being said, thank you for what you do. Keep doing it. I'll make sure we continue to live states apart because I know your stories. I'm not traveling on a plane with you. I'm not going through TSA with you. I'm not doing any of that stuff with you.
Well, if they're all watching me, that means they're not harassing you. So
that's true.
I'm taking one for the team. So,
that's true,
but no, Clark, I appreciate that, and ditto to everything you said. Right back at you.
Thank you. So that leads me to my last question, which is the question I've asked everybody, and I'm going to ask you too. How would you define community, or what does community mean to you? Like, true essence of community. What does it mean for Keith?
I think it's the people that I interact with on a daily basis. It's not just when you go to the coffee shop and you see the barista that makes your coffee, but it's the people that you have an ongoing, consistent relationship with, that you say hi to in the morning, that you actually say, hey, how are you doing? That you're willing to sit down, have a cup of coffee with, have a beer with. And hopefully you enjoy most of the people in your community, even if you don't always get them.
Yeah. Should. You gotta be open to it.
Absolutely.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching today. Obviously a conversation that started in one place, kind of meandered through the tales of security, maybe the lines of TSA, if you will. I hope that you are starting to think about things a little bit differently when it comes to what you're building or consuming, or just kind of being present in the software world today. Leave some of your stories below or point to some references. Keith, where do people find you?
Oh, I am Casey Software, CASEY Software, and that's me on LinkedIn and Twitter and in our That Conference Slack channel.
Yep.
Pretty easy to find in general.
God bless. Well, thank you, sir, for the time. We will put together a few links and drop them down in the notes. Everybody, thank you for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you.